Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Just giving a moment to let everyone come in from the waiting room. Welcome to this session with 360 Giving today, which is part of the Festival of Learning 2024, and we're really excited to have you here. My name is Grace. I'm the Head of Programme Delivery at London Funders, and I'm with my colleague Aura, our Learning and Comms Coordinator as well. We're really excited to be in, I think, the fourth year of this festival now, which is an opportunity for all our members to come together, share learning and ideas, and really be inspired by others in the funding community and civil society. We have a really packed programme, which sessions are categorised under 5 core themes this year, which is participation, process, equity, collaboration, and systemic change. So I hope we'll see you at various other sessions as well. We will be kind of live tweeting across the festival on our at London Funders, and the hashtag is Festival of Learning 24. We'll pop in the chat. We are also recording this session so we can capture the lessons emerging today. So if there's anything you would not like us to broadcast, please just drop myself or Aura a message. And we're encouraging speakers and attendees to get involved online. So do feel free to share what you've learned from this session, whether that's on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever you like to share. And if you could, we'd encourage you to just change your name as well, just put your organisation there, just so we can see where you're all from as well and see what amazing range of funders we have in the room. We hope you enjoy the session. I'm going to pass you on to Tracey and Katherine from 360 Giving. And Tracey, over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Grace, and great to meet you all. So today, this session is all about insights and impact and how data can transform grant-making practice. So it will be myself, Tracey. I work at 360 Giving. I'm the Deputy Chief Exec, and I am with my colleague, Katherine. Or Katherine, do you want to say hello yourself?
Yeah. Hello, I'm Head of Support and Services, and so I'm responsible for the support we provide to funders to share their data.
Excellent. So Katherine, if you could get the slides up, that will be great. So I'll just spend a minute talking through about what the session is about today, and what we'll be kind of discussing together. So if we have the next slide, please. So we're going to start off with just a little bit of a chat about how do you use grants data. So we'll be posting that question to you for you to either kind of unmute yourselves or to just post in the chat, and we can kind of read that out to get started. And then we'll talk about how you can use 360 Giving data to help you understand a little bit more about your grants data, your grants practice, and putting that into context. Then we'll be giving you some more examples about how 360 Giving has been used to help inform research and strategy and to develop insights and inform decision making. Then we'll have another bit of a questions, bit of a discussion about some of the things that you might be able to take away from this session, some of your next steps, and then we'll end with some of the support that we can provide to you at 360 Giving. So we'll try and do this all within within the next 55 minutes. And generally, if you wouldn't mind holding sort of questions about what we're presenting towards the end, that would be really helpful. But otherwise, for the more interactive sessions, do feel free to unmute yourself or just write things in the chat. So next, so this is where we're starting off questions for you. So hopefully everyone's not too full after a lunch break and are ready to kind of share with us about how are you currently using grants data in your work? And what questions about grants data would you like to be able to answer? And this could be about your organisation or the sector you fund or the wider UK grant making field. So we'll give you just a few minutes to kind of think through, but then do please let us know in the chat about how you're currently using grants data, because it's interesting for others in the room to kind of learn from what you're doing, and also to think about some of the questions that you might have, because others in the room might also have those same questions. Great, thank you. So we've got one question in terms of to identify cold spots of funding across London. That's an important question. And we've actually done some work to help funders with looking through the locations of where they're funding and where they're not funding. So that's an important question. Thank you for that. And we've got, oh, they're coming in now, to test assumptions about their impact. That's great. And we're sharing grants data with our community panels to inform their decision making. So that's really important of not only of using your data, but sharing it back for people to kind of understand how decisions can be made. And we use grants data mainly to see if we've previously funded an organisation. It's helpful. And identify our own gaps in grant making locally. So similar to what the previous one has said before. Of course, we use it in reporting. And this is a good question, but they would like a question they would like a borough-wide overview of the funding landscape at many different levels, which another person has also agreed on. And this is an important question to have, and how grants data can be used is to check that's what your organisation doing is matches or similar to what you think you're doing. So really to kind of check your assumptions and behaviour. And the question we've got is, what can grants data tell us about which organisations may be disadvantaged by the current grants process? And that's a really important question that we've been looking at 360Giving as well, in terms of gathering and capturing diversity, equity and inclusion data, and really kind of supporting organisations to look at who they're funding. And of course, to be open and transparent about all of our grants. That's a key thing for us at 360Giving as well. And I'll do a last one of, we're currently using grants data to analyse trends to enable us to make the case of the importance of the funding we make and the work of our grantees. And we would like to be able to identify gaps easier within the data and maybe some more insights on what the data we receive is actually telling us. So hopefully this gives everyone in the room a bit of a flavour about some of the questions that other grant makers are sort of working on, thinking about, and some of the practices as well. And so I'm going to hand over to Katherine, who will talk a little bit more about some of the grants data we have. And actually, as we go through the session, we'll be able to kind of show how you might answer some of these questions directly yourselves, or perhaps some of the research that we have done might draw and provide some insight into that. So, Katherine.
Thank you. Tracey. Oh, just got an echo there. Yeah, so before talking about like the data and how it's used, just a little bit about 360Giving for those of you who don't know us. So we were founded in 2015, so a relatively young organisation, but not just the new kid on a block anymore. And we support grant makers to publish their data using the 360Giving data standard. And I'll explain a bit more about what that means. We also help people to access and use the data. We've created tools to make it easier to explore it so that you can download it, you can visualize it. So we are a small charity. We've got 6 members of staff and we work with 2 part-time freelancers. So for us in our current strategy, we're very motivated by data use. So we've got a vision that UK grant making becomes more informed and effective and strategic through the use of data. And really what we're hoping for is that more money goes where it's needed the most to support communities and good causes through a more informed understanding of the grant making picture. So the kinds of questions you've mentioned, how can this data be used to help help you understand what's going on with the grant making and make those good decisions. So a key element of that informed decision making from the data, it relies on the data itself. So supporting organisations to share grants data data that they have, so we can increase the amount of data available, including filling key gaps in the funders who aren't currently sharing data. So that's my responsibility at 360Giving. But as well as increasing the amount of funders sharing data, we're really keen to look at things like quality, timeliness, and the depth of the data, so that there can be kind of even more meaningful data shared, which can allow for more sophisticated kinds of analysis. So, you know, there's data is great, but in order for that data to help inform people's decision making, we know we need to support people to with their ability to use the data. So that involves both things like improving people's skills and confidence to use it through training, but also making it easier to access and use through the kinds of tools that we've built, and inspiring people for how it can be used. So we're really keen to kind of transform the way that the funders think about data, how they use it in their work, so that it can kind of support grant making at all different kinds of stages. And as part of that, we're keen to advocate for kind of supportive policies for data use with policymakers and others. So, you know, why do any of this? Why bother? So we were founded by a philanthropist and grant maker, and they wanted to answer a basic question, and they wanted to know who else is funding what I'm funding. They wanted to be able to learn from others, they wanted to be able to collaborate, and they also wanted to see what those gaps were. But without information about who's funding what, it's very difficult to do that. So although funders do share information about their grants through annual reports and evaluations, through lists, people have databases or maps on their website. When data is in different formats, it is really hard, and it takes a lot of effort to get that data into one place and get it into a usable shape. So the reason we developed the 360Giving data standard was to allow for funders to share their information in the same way. And by sharing data in the same way, it allows you to bring that data together, so you can combine it and you can analyze it, and it makes it a lot easier to kind of get started with using it. So when the data is more usable, more people use it, and then we're able to kind of unlock those insights that comes from it. So although 360Giving data sharing does support transparency, and we think transparency is a really important value, it isn't actually that inspires our work. It's this original idea about learning and learning from others and using data to get insights. So it was really great to hear those ways you're kind of using data already and some of the questions that you've got. And they really resonate with the kinds of things that we see. So we know that the kind of common uses we see are things like people using the data to look for particular recipients, look at particular grants, and sort of do as part of due diligence, kind of exploring in the kind of very specific ways. There's also ways that you can visualize the data. So you can take grants data, but you can also take grants data and combine it with other data about locations, like statistical information, also about organizations. And when you combine this together, you can start to tell kind of stories. We're starting to see funders use 360 data and grants data and other data in there to support strategy. So looking at a strategy development to see where they fit alongside other funders and where maybe they should be focusing their attention, but also funders using it as part of ongoing monitoring to kind of keep check of are they funding what they think they are, and how are things evolving over that time. So there's a big part of how this data helps you kind of understand your place alongside other funders. As Tracey mentioned, we're sort of doing analysis, and in particular we're starting to carry out analysis of about particular sectors, wanting to show trends in funding and also context about the organisations that are working in that field and they're getting funding and their kind of resources available. So that's been really exciting, and that's helped to kind of support collaborations. And then finally, this year particularly, we're starting to look kind of really UK-wide grant making across the board to develop insights which we hope will support decision making and policy. So Tracey will explore some of those uses of data through analysis a bit later on, and we can give you a bit of inspiration, but I'm going to kind of before that give a little demo about our tools so you can kind of see some of the more specific ways that data gets used. So don't know if you've seen this visualization before. This was developed by Statistics Canada, and it shows the data use pipeline. And so what it does is it shows the kinds of activities needed to turn data, the information you have, into kind of impactful stories. And so first you need to think about your questions, and that's why we started off with some questions for you. You've shared some, and there may be many others that you have, but essentially if you want to use data, you have to start with something that you want to kind of ask of that data, and that's really a good way of kind of focusing attention. So once you've got those questions, then you need to find, well, what data is there that could help me answer that question, gather it together so that you can start to kind of answer those questions. So often with data, depending where you're getting it from, it will need some kind of data cleaning. You need to make sure it's consistent, includes relevant data that you can use, that you're not including things that aren't relevant to your question or the things that you want to look at. So when we're looking at this, these kind of first two stages, actually 360Giving data was developed to be able to sort of answer key questions. So it was designed by grant makers, open data experts and sector experts with the kinds of questions that you might want to ask about grant making in mind. So a lot of those kind of key things about who, what, when, how much are kind of baked into 360Giving data. And it's also been formatted ready for use. So some of those kind of more challenging things about getting the data together have been sort of have been dealt with by the time you're looking at 360Giving data. And as I said, we've developed tools to make it easier to use, and that means that you can kind of start using this data straight away. So I'll be able to demo a few of those ways that you can kind of started using 360Giving data like today, straight away. But then Tracey will also talk to you about the kind of other the kind of later stages of the data use pipeline, analyzing, modeling, and telling stories, which takes something a bit more complex than just tools to achieve. So firstly, there's a few features of 360Giving which can be a little bit unusual, but kind of help to us to achieve our goals with it. So firstly, that data is standardized. It's called the 360Giving data standard. And what that means is all 360Giving data uses the same headings and the same data formatting. So that means that all the data is kind of compatible with each other from the get-go. The other thing about 360Giving data is that it's machine readable. And so that means it's shared in spreadsheets, line by line, each grant. And what that means is that you can slice and dice the data in different ways. And it also has key fields and pieces of information in it, which allows that the data to be kind of used in tools and also linked to other data sources. So that's that kind of piece that it's designed for kind of use through tools. And then finally, and one of the most important things is that it's released as open data. And what that means is that funders share it with a clear permission for its use. And when funders share it with that permission for use, it means we can build tools and a community of people who use that data, because we can rely on that data being there, and there's no ambiguity about what permission there is to use it. So that's a really kind of key features of 360Giving data. And the reason we can do all of the other things is because these kind of three features exist. Quickly wanted to explain the kind of range of information that can be included in the data, because this does influence what you can do. So in the standard, we deliberately created it so it was kind of relatively simple. And what that meant is there's only 10 fields of data that must be included in every grant record. And it covers the who, what, how much, and when for each grant. So that's for grants to organisations, it's who's the organisation's name, but also an identifier like a charity or company number. For grants to individuals, it's still 10 fields, but with the recipient name and the ID, these are expected to be anonymised because you need to protect the privacy of those individuals. So as well, you've got the kind of amount, how much it was when it was awarded, the date when it was awarded, a title and description that tells you what that grant was, what the purpose was, and then you've got an identifier which distinguishes one grant from another, which is one of those things about the machine readable. You need to be able to kind of distinguish them from each other. So that is the kind of required information. Every grant record in 360Giving will have that. But there is also other information that does get shared, and we recommend whenever people can, they share things like location information about where the recipient or the grant is based, about things like grant program names, which is very useful for understanding the different kind of patterns of grant making within a funder, and things like grant duration, which are really valuable pieces of information that help us understand grants over time and get more context for grants. So it's also possible to include things like about funding type and things like organization websites or descriptions, but some of those kind of key recommended fields are the ones that we use the most and which get the most use in our tools. So although most funders are sharing a wide range of information and more than those 10 fields, it is important to be aware of this limitation. So not all 360Giving data is going to have all of this information available. So when you're kind of looking for things and using it, there will be sometimes gaps in the kind of information you can get. So I mentioned these 10 fields, and here we've got a screen grab of a grant record in our tool GrantNav, which shows those 10 fields. So at the top, we've got the title and the title and the identifier. Then we've got the funding organisation, name and identifier, which is BBC Children Need. And then we've got the recipient organisation, name and identifier, which is Just for Kids Law. Then we can see how much they awarded, when they awarded it. And at the bottom, it's a bit small, but you can also see the description, which is explaining what the grant was awarded for. So that's the minimum information. That could be really useful, but that's just the kind of starting point for using the data. So, as I said, because 360Giving is open, standardized and machine readable data, we've been able to build tools that know how to use it. And as soon as an organization has shared their data, it can be plugged straight into those tools, which like cuts through those first few stages of the data analysis pipeline. So we have two main tools. We've got GrantNav, which is the search engine for 360Giving data. It allows you to explore the data in detail, line by line, each grant record. And then we've also got 360 Insights, which provides an overview of data with visualizations. So you can do quite a lot with these tools, but Tracey will also talk about the kind of other things you can do with the data once you get into kind of analyzing it. So I'm going to share some top tips for using GrantNav, which is the search engine. It's useful for anyone who's interested in finding out more about grants data. So it can help funders see how their funding fits alongside others, where there might be overlaps. So you can check who else has funded a particular organisation. Maybe you get an application and you want to see who else has funded it. You could also look at your existing grantees and then see who else has funded them. Or you might be thinking about potential partners, funders that you might want to work with and see what range of organisations they're working with. So this also helps charities. If they want to look for funding, there's a wide range of UK funders who are sharing data, and you can find out what they're recently funded, and also if there are any organisations or projects that are funded that are like theirs, or if they're funding in their local area, and use that information to decide whether to kind of put in an application. This data also helps you see if what other funders are giving in a particular place. You can see how many grants, how much, which organisations are in a particular location. And so we know that this data is also useful for people like local authorities who want to know kind of what's happening in their borough, or for local infrastructure bodies who are supporting local charities and groups to find grants. So it's also possible to explore the data looking at things like issues of sectors that are being supported. So you can do keyword searches on text fields to kind of surface some of the thematic elements within the grants data. So as well as being able to do these kind of key things, which we're going to focus on today, you can download the results of any of your searches from GrantNav, which means that as well as like exploring it and looking at the tools, you can take that data away for further analysis and combine it with other sources of data. So now I'm going to move over to demoing GrantNav itself. And so for any of you who haven't been here, it's orange. So if you're on an orange website, you're in the right place. And it's got a big search box because it's designed for searching. So there are a few different ways you can search the data. You can look at the grants, you can search by funders here, you can research by recipient organisations and individuals. So we haven't got loads of time today, so I'm just going to focus on the three main ways you can search the data using the grant search function. So if I click on grant search here, I'm going to be taken to this other main view. And this is a place where you can start to dig into the data. So as I said, we've got this big search box at the top, so you can type in what you want and start to look for it. you can look across all of the data when it says all grant fields, but you can also make selections so that you're looking at locations or just recipients. You can look at grant program titles, or you can look at titles and descriptions, which is part of the grants information. So I'll put it back on all grant fields. And under this search box, what you've got is this summary. So the summary is basically showing you what are the grants that are in your search. So at the moment, I haven't put in any search terms. So it's got all 1 million of plus grants in there and 274 different funders. But as you start to apply searches, you'll see that summary change and you'll get different numbers. And this summary is one of the ways that you can start to kind of sense check the searches that you're looking at. And then if I go down a little bit more, then we start to get to the grants records themselves. So as I talked about before, we've got these 10 required fields, and you can actually see them visualized here. So we've got this description title, we've got the description here, then we can see the date when it was awarded, the amount, who the funder is, who the recipient is, and here Sport England has shared data about location, so you can also see that this is a grant that went to the Northwest in Tameside. So you can kind of scroll through and look through the different records, but because there's a lot of data here, we've also put lots of filters in which can help you to kind of narrow down your search, and that's the idea behind GrantNav. So you can do things like focus on the amount awarded. So you could look at small grants or larger grants. You can also filter by award date. So you could look at just grants from the last few years, or you could be looking at historical data. You can put a particular selection, which is about, a particular financial year or financial years. And you can also book by location, which I'll show you in a little bit. And then we've got, you can filter by funding organisation type. So we've segmented the different funders who've published into broad groups. So are they a lottery distributor? Is it central government? Is it grant making organisation, which is kind of most of them? Is it a local government organisation or devolved government, which in this case is Scotland? You can also filter by particular funding organisations, and you can decide whether you want to look at organisations, individuals, or both. And then we've got this one thing which is about whether it's a direct grant or a free grant. So we've got a way of labelling the data so that you can look at you can exclude or include grants that have been given to grant makers for other purposes. So that's a bit of a kind of quick review of like what you're seeing here. But the only thing I did want to point out is, well, I mentioned you can download the data, and that's here. So on this right-hand side, it says export search data. So you don't want to press it now with no filters applied, because essentially you download the whole database. But once you have got a search with results that you like, you can take that data away and use it for other purposes. So the first thing I'm going to show is, as I said, you can look for particular organisations. So our top tip for that is, if you know the name of the organisation you're looking for, always start by typing their name by putting the name in quotation marks. So whenever using GrantNav, always put your search in quotation marks, because it's going to make it more specific. So if I put that name in, Just for Kids Law, we saw the screen grab of their grants previously. And I'm going to run that search. And now if we look at the summary, we can see instead of the million grants, we've now got 113 different grants. We can see that £8 million have been awarded based on this search, and there are 34 different funders. There have been grants awarded between 2010 and March 2024. So some really recent grants. And then we can start to see information here. So in this search, if you wanted to, you could start to look at what's the largest amount that this organisation has got. So you can see that there's a large grant of £600,000, but also you could look at what's the most recent grant. So here's the latest grant, and we can see that there's actually a grant that was awarded in March. And so if you could scroll down, you can start to see a little bit more about this, the grant information. What we can see now is, here's that grant we saw previously, that grant record in the screen grab. This is the BBC Children Agree grant. So when you're looking at GrantNav and you've got a search, if you see something that's underlined, that means it's a link to a different view. So if I click on here, we can have a look, and that's going to open up that grant record, and we can see the information about the grant, but also we can see below the grant record there's other information that BBC Children in Need have shared. So they've shared information about the grants programme and the grant duration, and so that information is also available to explore. if I go back here, one of the other things you can do is, so you found some grants here, and you're particularly interested in a funder. Also, London Legal Sport Trust. So if you click on this link here, instead of looking at a grant record, you're now looking at an organisation record. And here we can see London Legal Sport Trust and the grants that they've shared in a list. We can see the other organisations they funded. And also, if that organisation is also a recipient of grants, you can see when they've received those grants. So that's a view of an organisation. That's all of the data we have about them together. This is a grant, this is a funder and a recipient. And then if I go back to the that grants record again, if instead I click on Just for Kids Law, this is going to open up the very similar page. It's still an organisation record, but just the Kids Law, they're just a recipient, so they haven't made grants. And here we can look at that information. So scrolling down, we can see they've had grants in mostly pounds, but also in dollars. And then we can see all the different funders where they've given them an award and indicated that the grantee was Just for Kids Law. So that's one way you can kind of take a deep dive into particular organisations. If you want to just explore their grants, you can open it up, and then when you've done that, you've got this filter in place here, and then you can take away that data if you just wanted to know about their grants. So I'm going to now go and just show you a little bit about locations. So with locations, you can do a search in this top thing. So instead of clicking on recipient names, you could say Croydon and put that in and run a search. And if you look at that, you'll then start to see grants which have this information saying that the district for that grant is Croydon. So that's great. But if you wanted to look at more than one place or a broader area, then what we recommend is using a search which uses the filters instead. So if I bring you down here, to here, what we have with this kind of location search is two layers. We've got a country and region filter, and then we've got a district one. So for instance, we're interested in London because we're at London Funders session. And so I'm going to select that first. And now all the districts here are just London boroughs. So then we can make a decision about which particular places we want to look at. And so if we said we wanted to look at Islington, but we also want to look at Southwark, we can then click on those two. And now we know that all the results here, so there's 20,000 grants here. All of the grants have either got a recipient in or a grant location that is in Southwark or Islington, and you can start to explore that data a bit more. If you're just interested in a single place and you want to take that data, you can also click on one of these district views, and this is a slightly different view, and this is a table, and it shows all of the grants that have gone to Southwark. So here we can see the earliest one all the way down, and as before, you can take this data away in a CSV and kind of use it further. So that's the kind of location search. So that's the warning about that, is that not all grants have location, but it is really powerful and very specific because it uses either a postcode or a geocode for those locations to really center on that information. And then the last thing I'm going to quickly show you on this is how to do keyword searching, which is another kind of important way of looking at kind of more thematic, maybe sector kind of based information. So when doing one of these searches, you can look at all grant fields, but one of the things we recommend is maybe selecting it to title and description. If you do that, then you're basically just looking at the bit of text that funders provided to say what the grant was for, so you can be a little bit more specific. And then as before, you want to put anything that you're searching for in quotation marks. So if I'm interested in grants to young people, I want to put that into quotation marks. So if I set that off and a search, this titles and descriptions and the term young people, there are 60,000 grants and over 229 or different funders have used the term young people in the grant description or title. So that's a lot of data, and that might be what you want. You might want to filter it to get by location or those things. But what you can also do is combine these different terms together. So if you kind of, you're interested in actually children and young people, if you put children and young people into these quotation marks and did a search, what you end up with is 10,000 grants. So that's narrow, and that can be really useful. So then you've got those kind of two pieces of information in the grants data, and you can work with that. But one thing I did want to tell you about is GrantNav has this kind of way of working with text called operators. So if I slightly edit this search instead and have children, and then make and capitalized and put this in there. So because I've turned and from lowercase into capitals, and because I've split up those two terms, children and then young people, into two different ones, what I can now search for is any text that's got both of those words, but they don't have to be together in a phrase. So if you put something in quotation marks, it's got to be together. But if you put them apart, it means that the text must say children and young people, but not necessarily in the same place. And then we've got 14,000 grant records. And so we've got kind of broader range of grants, but they're still going to be relevant to what we're interested in. These operators can also be used to split these things apart. So if you're interested in children or young people, you'll end up with 1,380,000 grants. So that's quite a lot of different grants. So that's maybe too broad. But if you went for children and not young people, that's a kind of either or. Again, you're kind of changing the way that you're including these different things. So it's worth being aware of these operators and the quotation marks to help you kind of get to the information that you want. So I'm going to do a few things to kind of combine some of these keyword searches. And then, so if I add in, instead of just children and young people, which we know got a lot of results, I'm going to put in justice as well. And so I've got those three terms are going to turn up. They can turn up anywhere in this text, and I can search for them. Now have 74 results. So not loads of grants, and it's going to be relatively specific. We've got data about 18 different funders, and then we can look at these different scope here. And then in this, we could also say, well, what we want is recent grants. So I'm going to apply a filter that's for grants that are awarded since January 2020. And so that's now narrowed it down to 43 grants. So again, quite a small number. And then one thing I'd want to do is I'm going to just look at grants that are awarded by grant making organisations and lottery distributors. So I don't at the moment want to look at grants that are awarded by central government. So then that's given me 30 grants. So that's just quite a small number. You could scroll through them and have a little look. If I search it by latest first, we can see what kinds of organisations and funders are involved. And at any point, if you wanted to take this data away, you can. So again, we've got this Just for Kids Law grant coming up, because this time, instead of looking for the recipient, we've actually looked for the words, and the grant description includes the words justice system and children and young people. But before kind of finishing this little demo, I did want to show you, as well as being able to download this data, you can also visualize this data in Insights. So Insights is our other tool, and I'm going to open that there. So what Insights does is give us a dashboard view. So here I've just switched to a dashboard view for BBC Children in Need. We've been looking at their grants a little bit. And so what you can see here is the overall data for their grants. And then we can see different bands for their grant making sizes. So you can see where they've got kind of more smaller grants or larger grants. And you can kind of have this dashboard view. But also, if in GrantNav you click on this, see more detail in Insights, it will also create a dashboard which is for that view in GrantNav. So think you've put together a series of search terms that you're really interested in, that the place that you're interested in, a set of terms of the kind of thing that you're interested in, maybe a time period that you're particularly interested in. You might even be filtering by particular kinds of funders. Once you've got that search together, you can take away that data in GrantNav, but you can also look at it in Insights. And here we can see view, which is slightly different. So we can see the amounts of the grants, but we can also see, well, who are the top funders, who's given the most grants and how are they distributed. And then we can start to see what type of organisation they are and the size of grants. So again, there's quite a large number of grants that are between 100,000 and 1 million, but there are also some smaller grants. We can see when it was awarded, and we can see the different grant programme names they were named under. So you can see some of them are actually named for criminal justice, which is why they're coming up. And then we've got this location. So we can also see the location visualized in a chart, and then it also has a map. So what this allows you to do, that if you are sort of particularly interested in London, you can then sort of scroll in and say, well, out of the London ones in the heat map, where are the most London grants going? So it's a small segment, so it's not large numbers, but we've got 4 in Islington, 4 in Hackney, and 1 in Hammersmith, Southwark, Fulham, Westminster and Newham, and then none in the outlying areas. So this is the way that we can kind of visualize this data slightly differently from the kind of zoomed in view to a kind of more aggregated view. And then the other good thing that the Insights does, which is it takes the grants data and it then combines it with other data sources. So in particular, when a recipient organisation has been identified as a charity or a company or another type of entity, we can find that from the data that's been shared, and then we can talk about what type of organisation. So out of these 30 grants, we know for a fact that 18 were charities, 16 were community interest in companies, 2 were companies limited by guarantee, and 1 was university. And then so for the other 3 grants, we can't say that for certain, but we've got that information. And then when you've got that kind of information about who's a registered charity, it means you can also fetch information about those organisations from the Charity Commission. So here we can see in the chart that of the 16 organisations that were charities, we could actually see that 11 of them are very large organisations. So they've got £1 million in grants, up to £1 million to £10 million turnover in terms of the organisation size. And it's also possible to see when were they founded and how old is that organisation. So one of the things that Insights has been used for is for just that question that someone had before, are we doing what we said we do? We've had examples of some funders who've looked at their grants at different programmes, they've looked at their small grants programme, but when they've looked at the profile of the income of charity recipients, the size of the organisations has been larger than they expected. So sometimes the grants data can tell you certain things, but what you can say when you can combine that data with grants data with other data sources, that provides more context and it allows you to kind of make more meaningful kind of say more meaningful things about that data. So this is kind of what you can do with a tool. This is the data that just comes straight out of those tools and it's automatically combined with these other data sources. But if you then take the data away and do more analysis, you can do even more sophisticated things. So that's my cue to stop sharing and pass over to Tracey, who's going to do the rest.
Great, thank you, Katherine. And I will just share my screen. And just for everyone on, this is a session that Katherine and others will put on, and it's usually 1 hour and 15 minutes, I think. So what we really try to do is just really distill it down so you get a flavour of some of these things that you're able to do. And some of the questions that we had in the chat, which I think one of them was, would like to see what grants are in a particular location or a borough, I think was mentioned. Hopefully you'll be able to see that those types of questions you can answer with some of the data that's already available. But I will just talk a little bit about some of the further research and kind of questions that you might be able to explore, and then we'll end with a little bit of you discussing about some of the questions and reflections from this session. So I will just share my screen. And where am I? Huh, here I am. Right. And I will just talk about, so starting off with the analysis. And so with the quick tour that we've given you, you're able to you should be able to think about your own grant making and put that into the context of the wider kind of grant making scene of what we've seen. It's a huge amount of data, so we don't typically start off with, oh, what can this £1 billion worth of data set kind of surface up in terms of insights, but we typically start with a kind of question that we're interested to explore. And so once we've had that question, we then need to think about, well, what is the cohort? Who's the population that we're going to be thinking about in terms of understanding a little bit more? Is it by the sector? Are we thinking about the location? Are we thinking about the grant maker? And this is where, to be very geeky, where lists and registers become really, really important. So having registration IDs from charities and kind of defining what charities you might be interested in looking at, or what sector you're interested in looking at. So, for example, legal aid, what are the types of organisations that are provide legal aid support, for example. And then typically after we kind of understand and you've defined the cohort, we want to be able to kind of add further context to, as what Katherine has said, put in other data sets alongside your data to kind of get further information from that. So it might be using statistics such as the indices of multiple deprivation, where we're interested to know, are your grants going to the areas which have the highest levels of deprivation, might be one example. So what I'll do now is just go through a couple of slides where we're just showing some of the research that we have done, where we've approached it with a set question, or grant makers have come to us with a question and we've tried to explore that. So this here is a question from Access to Justice Foundation. I know they're on the call today, and so that you will recognise this work. Access to Justice Foundation commissioned us in 2022 to help them to map where legal advice was being funded and by whom, and the underlying trends in funding. And the context for the work is that some of you will know that over a decade, funding for legal advice has reduced by over a quarter. That's like 28% by the latest National Audit Office report. And it was important to undertake research to support Access to Justice Foundation to develop further collaboration of funders to address the opportunities, the problems and gaps in the legal advice sector, and to approach this in a strategic way. And so mapping out the sector provided a first step to driving some strategic giving to address these gaps. This image, which looks very busy and it might look quite small on your screens depending on the size of your screen, is called a chord diagram, and it's actually interactive. We can sort of play around with that. And what it does is it visualizes the network of grant makers who are connected due to funding the same grantees. And what you're able to do, and I'll stick the link just after this, is you can see the number of grantees that funders have in common. And whilst it looks pretty, it does have a function of quickly presenting all the funders and their links to other funders, whether that's purposely linked or not purposely, but it's just that they do have these commonalities and they are part of this sector. So, but in order to get to this image, there is actually a lot of work that needs to be done. So going back to that pipeline, that data journey that we showed you, in terms of defining the sector, like what is specialist legal advice, what are the type of organisations that are involved in that, and how will we be able to kind of identify them from all the kind of thousands of charity registrations that there are. And that's a piece of work that we had to do ourselves and with Access to Justice Foundation as well, to kind of look through and help to identify, define, and of course, clean that data and make that ready to prepare. More generally, for every funder that publishes data to the 360Giving standard, we usually provide this kind of analysis alongside a few other bits, which shows all the funders and recipients that they have in common with other funders. And generally, funders find this helpful for seeing which of their recipients are most frequently funded and who are the other funders they share the most recipients in common with. And we're really hoping that this will support further collaboration within the sector. So our next question to ask, what was asked was like, what is happening to organisations that provide infrastructure support? And last year, we undertook research to understand the challenges facing infrastructure organisations. And we had noticed that given the rise in demand for frontline services, some funders had changed their strategies to prioritise the frontline, and others closed funds that infrastructure organisations were eligible for either temporarily or permanently. And so we were made aware by several infrastructure organisations who saw an absence of funding opportunities that they could apply for. And this was concerning to us due to the important support that infrastructure organisations can provide to charities and community groups. And so this chart compares the growth in national and local infrastructure compared to 2011. And what it does, it presents a stark picture of what is happening to infrastructure bodies, particularly local infrastructure, which our report showed was more reliant on government funding compared to national infrastructure bodies, which tend to have a wider income portfolio, likely to include membership fees. And we can see over the decade, there's been a significant number of mergers and closures, particularly present in local infrastructure. And in comparison, there has been a small growth in total registered charities over the time, and much larger growth in number of community interest companies. And so inferring that a reduced infrastructure support sector is supporting an increased charity sector. Now, defining, extracting, analysing this data has meant we've provided evidence and insight into an area which was largely being ignored. And following our report, we've been in discussions with government ministers and research and policy teams, as well as infrastructure bodies, to discuss what research and policy steps should be considered. Another project which presents how data can inform decision-making and strategy is our work in mapping funding for legal advice in London. And our Chief Exec, Tanya, will be presenting on that next week. So that was a project specifically for London funders. So do come along to next week's session if you're interested to learn more about that. Lastly, I'm just going to talk about how you can use some of this data to kind of get more insights into general what is happening in the UK in UK grant making. So what is the size of UK grant making? What are the trends? And excitingly, we've got this a major project that's going to be launched in June this year. It's a collaborative project between Association for Charitable Foundations, Association of Charitable Organisations, UK Community Foundations, London Funders and Pearce Foundation, and supported by an advisory board of research and charity sector representatives. And it builds upon and expands previous work to understand the size of UK grant-making foundations, which we shared last year in a snapshot that we did, where we calculated that total grant-making to voluntary sector organisations from UK-based institutions is estimated at over 20 billion, and that was data from 2021-2022. So from this bubble diagram that you can see that it shows the amount of grant spending. You can see that the charitable grant makers segment provided the largest amounts of grants by amount, an estimated 7 billion or 35% of the total, compared to 6.4 billion for government sectors. And this information is important to provide additional context to your work. It contributes to our understanding of the value of grant making and the vital role it plays in supporting civil society. And with the data that is available within this project, which we're going to be opening up to enable people to look at and explore, but you will be able to compare your organisation to a range of other grant-making organisations, as well as understand further about the grants being provided in the sector and the recipients of these grants. And we're also going to be providing some more support services to enable grant makers to do benchmarking with this work. And just to sort of deep dive a little bit more into the UK grant making work that we've done and we're currently doing, the question was, what proportion of grants are made for longer term funding? And I think that speaks to another question that was put into the chat as well, in terms of what the data can show about funding practices. And so Katherine had already mentioned that grant duration is an optional field in 360Giving data standards, so not all publishers have included it in their data. So at the time of this snapshot report, duration of grant was available for around 36% of grants. But having this information is important given the discussions about the importance for longer term flexible funding, which are currently being debated within the sector. And what we can see here from the available data is that we do need more grant makers to put in how long they're providing the grants their grants are, the duration of their grants. But from what we can see, that fundraising grant makers, family and corporate foundations are more likely to offer longer grants of 12 months or more, while small grant makers and community foundations offer shorter term grants. And this is kind of interesting for us to kind of look at and reflect on, like, what changes can we make in order to, if we're going to be more flexible funders, if that's some of the strategies that grant makers are currently exploring. So I will stop there for now. We've done a lot of talking at you. And what we thought, just before we end, we will have we'll get you to kind of reflect a little bit, take 3 minutes, and again, to have a bit of a chat in the chat, or to unmute yourself if you feel comfortable to do that. And just think about if anything that we've said, any aha moments, we've called it, that you heard today about things you may want to try out in terms of your own grants data or looking at other grants data. Anything of the questions that you wrote before, do you think perhaps you might be able to answer yourself, or anything that you might actually, have you changed your question slightly from what you've initially written? So that would be great if you can put that in the chat and we can read out, perhaps Katherine can read out some of these questions. Oops. Put them back.
Yes, yeah, the presentation, and it's also, this is being filmed, so yeah.
Yeah, we can get the presentation sent out to everyone that's attended. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
While we're waiting for any questions to come in, I just want to say a huge thank you to Tracey and Katherine. And as Tracey mentioned, we have another session with 360Giving next week around advice work as well. So please do sign up to that if you're interested. And having had a sneak peek of the UK grant making site already as they're collecting the data, it's going to be really interesting to share that and see what more we can all do together with open data as well.
Okay.
Really feel free to come off your microphone if you have any questions.
If there's any questions or any sort of reflections that you've had, do you think you'll be able to tackle this? And certainly maybe while you're still thinking, feel free to do a chat. I'll just move on to kind of wrap up in that. Happy to take any sort of general questions about what has been said today now in the chat. But just to kind of leave you with things of not just, oh, we've given you lots of information, but ways in which you can get started. So you will get these slides afterwards. But you can, of course, explore the data, and you saw that how you can use GrantNav and Insight, and you can, the whole data set you can have access to that. I'd suggest that's more for sort of researchers and advanced data practitioners. We have an API that can enable you to access the data directly, or there's other methods that we have in order for you to access the whole data if you required. Our training and our and we also often run free workshops. So there's a free workshop about GrantNav, Introduction GrantNav. We do workshops and free training about how to collect DEI data, how to do intersectional data analysis. Is a workshop that we run regularly. This is all available for us. All our reports and some of the analysis that we've shown you today, they're on our website. You can just go to our reports section and download them. The visualizations that I've shown, while they were static today, they are, we use a platform called Flourish, so you can interact with them a little bit more. We can change the sizes, and you can kind of click on one funder and see all the common recipients that they have with other funders. If you are interested in doing a analysis, doing some data analysis, we offer free one-to-one data support calls. They tend to be on a Thursday morning. You can just book yourself into that. We're really happy to kind of chat with you. Otherwise, generally you can sign up to our newsletter. You'll be the first ones to hear about when we launch UK grant making. later on in the summer. And as Grace has mentioned, we'll be doing a bit of a deep dive into London funders in that in the UK grant making. So do stay tuned to that. Otherwise, happy to do sort of bespoke projects and workshops like the ones that we've discussed here. So do just speak to us. Very, very happy to have a conversation about what we can do to help you answer those questions you have. But really, really thank you so much for your time and attention today. And hopefully we will, you'll be in contact with us, or certainly hope that you'll play around with some of the tools that we have.
Yep, and definitely come along to our long hour and 15 grant nav session, which goes into much more detail about how to use the tool than we could do today. It's free.
Thank you so much, Katherine and Tracey. That was so interesting. Really appreciate your time, and thank you everyone for coming. And hopefully we'll see you at more festival sessions soon. Thank you very much. Bye.